All right, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Friday. And of course, good Shabbos to those who are observant. Welcome to it. This is another episode of Vuka Nazo. Remember, if you love the show, whether you're watching on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, do me a solid. Find me on YouTube and hit that subscribe button and the bell notification so that you know exactly when to find and catch our shows. And of course, if you want to find us and get in touch, we have a website. Find me at www.bigdaddyliberty.com. With that being said, welcome to it. How about we get straight into the news? All right, we begin here this morning as I take you to KwaZulu-Natal in that part of the world to focus in on the politics there. You'll remember that we discussed the election of Unomusa Dube-Ncube as the new premier of KwaZulu-Natal, replacing, of course, the former chairperson, Zikalala, former ANC chairperson in the province and former premier who later resigned after he lost his chairmanship, lost it to Usboniso Duma. Now, at the time, I made it quite clear that based on what they were saying, it was clear that their strategy was to elect Unomusa Dube, probably as a reward of sorts for having stepped back in her vying for the chairperson role, thereby giving her support to Usboniso Duma. And I argued that Usboniso Duma would likely stay out of government in order to try and rebuild structures of the ANC to shore up support ahead of the next election. Why? Because in the next election, it is almost a sure bet that the ANC will lose KwaZulu-Natal to a coalition of sorts headed by the IFP, an IFP who have been in a sharp ascendancy in terms of their numbers in the province. Well, it turns out I wasn't quite correct, albeit my assessment though is on the money to an extent, in the sense that it's still, Sibonisa Duma still has the responsibility as the new chairperson to shore up support, but it would seem to me that the strategy is actually different-fold. In him stepping into government as the new Economic Development MEC, it seems to me, and this is my analysis on this, that the play here is still linked to building up a patronage network. You remember I mentioned this in our previous video, that the ANC wins primarily by building up very extensive and nebulous networks of cronies, crooked cronies, connected cadres, and a tender network which is almost unparalleled. It's another economy in and of itself. And it makes sense to me, if I look at what's happening now, that with Uduma entering as the Economic Development MEC, there will be a flow of tenders heading in the right direction of those who are on the one hand loyal and maybe got him elected, but on the other to a wider network of people he has to appeal to for support. Again, I still repeat my challenge. I would love to be proved wrong on this. I would love to be proved wrong with this, because the ANC's track record, if you look at the record of history, has been exactly this. The taking over of state power in order to effectively create a parallel economy built on and dependent on the state and state contracts to buy and shore up support. Now, some of the other changes to the cabinet that were announced by the new Premier Unomusa Dube were as follows. Now, we saw a change here of the Education MEC Kwazi Mshengu was replaced by Umbali Fraser, who had also contended, you remember, for that top post as the Premier. Amanda Bani Mapena, another newcomer to the legislature, will replace Ukengiwe Mavimbela, who replaced Mavimbela in heading up the sports, arts and culture portfolio. Human Settlements MEC Ujo Mosbia has been replaced by Untontugo Mahyaba, while, as I mentioned, the MEC for Economic Development, the former Uravi Pillay, replaced by the current chairperson of the province, Usboniso Duma. Peggy Nkonyeni, staying in government but being moved to the finance portfolio, end of quote. Now, all of these changes at the very least are simply this: replacing those who are not within the favored faction with those who were. So there's political patronage in that sense. It's the economic or really financial patronage, the almost state tender patronage, which I'm arguing is what you should really be watching, because it is what the ANC will be banking on to shore up support for 2024. All right, folks, we move on, but stick to KZN for a moment in a developing story, and perhaps one which we'll cover on Sunday. Liberty and Friends. Well, as of this morning, there were some arrests which were effected. Indeed, several people having been arrested by the Hawks for their alleged involvement in those July riots from last year. You'll remember those riots, very violent and very destructive indeed. Billions upon billions of rands in destruction, and over 350 people died in those riotous periods last year, which, please God, should never ever happen again. But according to this Times Live piece, by 10 a.m. on Thursday, at least 6 people had been nabbed in a clandestine operation by the Hawks, whose members were deployed in the province earlier this week in preparation for this takedown. Now, sources close to the operation said some arrestees are politically linked and have been identified as among those on a Hawks so-called hit list of about 80 people. This is where it gets interesting, because we saw this during the July riot, when a lot of those, if you remember, the social media dribbling and distracting messages, incitement and the like. Here's where it gets interesting. The piece continues to say that many of the are said to have been part of WhatsApp groups, such as the quote eThekwini shutdown and the quote Free Zuma, which were formed in the build-up to the unrest. Now, again, I'll say what I've always said on the show generally, whenever we read articles around, arrests being made. It is one thing to make arrests, it is another to bring forward hard evidence that builds solid cases for a prosecutor that secures convictions. Should these people face jail time? Of course, absolutely. A lot of them have a lot of blood in their hands, and it should be up to a competent Hawks team, a very skilled, articulate, and capable prosecutor who sees as many convictions as possible so that justice is actually served on this matter. All right, we ended here tonight with, unfortunately, some bad news, especially if you're someone looking for employment in manufacturing, with the manufacturing sector having seen another decline, a contraction, a shrinking, if you will, for the 4th month running. In fact, this piece by Business Day had this to say about it. The manufacturing activity has contracted for the 4th month in a row in June. That's according to Stats SA, who basically pointed out that the ongoing power cuts limited the recovery in the sector and reduced production volumes. They continue on by saying manufacturing production sank by 3.5% year on year, which was higher than the expected 2.5%, end of quote. Now, you've got to understand that there's a broader context here, and something which really, this will be the takeaway, and this is what you need to understand. Number one, the contraction in mining and also manufacturing, which is what we're talking about here, is 100% policy caused. Policy by bad politicians with bad ideas and trash, almost should not be implemented ideas. These ideas are leftist ideas which have effectively de-industrialized South Africa. Let me be precise and specific. You'll remember we did an episode on this issue where I had the late great economist Mike Schussler, shout out to Mike, man, on the show, and he explained how South Africa has been deindustrializing, and that the number of people who work in manufacturing today effectively it's so low that it almost, you have to go back to 1969 to find a number similar to this. If you look at the graph, in fact, which I'll put on the screen, there it is, you can see it. The numbers today reflect those of 1969, with a peak, if you will, in about 1992. So effectively, all of the ANC's years have seen them deindustrialize, destroy jobs in the manufacturing sector. Now, as I conclude, it gets even worse, because if you look at the total number of people employed in manufacturing as a whole percentage of society, in other words, if you take the total number of people in our population and you look at what percentage of them are employed in manufacturing, only 1.8%. Guys, only 1.8% of the total population in South Africa is employed in manufacturing. A number we only last saw, 86 years ago, roughly, in 1935. So that you need to understand my frustration here. And you need to understand why when I say things like socialism sucks, or statism socialism is cancer rather, statism sucks, and never trust a commie, that these are not just fun buzzwords. These ideas, statism, socialism, and communism, are the ideas that dominate our politics, are the very ideas that create the policies that we endure, we suffer in South Africa, and the exact sort of policies, the exact same ideas that are destroying sectors, destroying jobs, and literally preventing individuals, often poor, mostly black individuals, from accessing employment opportunities. The ideas that your politicians push have consequences. They have consequences. And in this instance, you're going to continue to see headlines such as these for as long as we continue seeing leftist politicians, whether they're in the ANC, EFF, whatever, the sort of politicians who believe the government and politicians and the state should run economic activity. For as long as that is the status quo, these are the sort of numbers and the sort of direction downwards that we'll continue to see. Something must give, and it'll begin with you changing who you vote for. All right, guys, on that note, thank you very much for watching this, the Friday edition of Vuka Nazo. Remember, we come to you weekdays every morning from about 7:30 or so every morning. With that being said, remember, if you want to find us, we are on our website at www.bigdaddyliberty.com. And of course, all our social media information is in the descriptor of this video. Happy Friday, good people, and Shabbat Shalom to those of you who are observant, and I'll see you next week, Monday, bright and early, for Vuka Nazo.